Thanks.
I'm sorry, I'm asking you all these questions like I'm the one that's doing the interview. But
No,
how
you're
cool that
totally
you're
good.
doing this.
Yeah, thanks. It's a team of us. We are all undergrads plus Annie at the U-TTEC Lab, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to promote psychology in all of its forms. So we're trying to allow people to understand what psychology is, maybe get motivated if they're going into psychology, or at the very least understand a little bit more about mindfulness and what that's all about as well. Would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself and what you do?
What I am doing right now is working as hard as I can to graduate from my program. So right now
Okay.
that means a lot of work on my dissertation and solidifying the ways in which I'm going to implement that study. I'm going to be doing a parent education intervention via telehealth. So we're going to do it just like this in Zoom. I'll be presenting really critical mental health information to parents. And then I'm going to open up for a discussion and questions. And then if they're interested, we'll do some case examples. So how to use this information with their adolescents. And hopefully it encourages them to feel more comfortable with having these kinds of conversations with their teens. So talking about feeling anxious or having depressive symptoms, being interested in substances, those sorts of things, building cultural pride. I'm super excited, but it's tricky because we're trying to do it in a way that makes sense, that's evidence-based, but there's not a lot of evidence on it because it's not done. So I'm like, okay, let's problem solve all of that.
That's awesome and really important, especially right now.
Yeah, when we're
Yeah.
like super disconnected in different ways, and it's only exacerbated by the people who are most struggling are the ones that have been struggling all along this. So I'm just like, okay, what can I do to just like address it, even if it's just a small piece of it?
That's awesome. So you can have clients while you're doing your dissertation?
It's expected. Like
Really?
as a graduate student in psychology, you're expected to have 7 different hats on all the time. You're a therapist, you're a researcher, you're a teacher, you're a mentor, you're a mentee, a supervisee. You're just trying to figure it out. And then there's some other people who are amazing and then also take on leadership roles locally, nationally. You're just trying to get as
Interesting.
much experience as possible during this time because you're in it trying to grow. And that growth is inherently tied to personal growth. So at some part of it, you have to ask yourself, like, what do I want out of this? And then you try to pick and choose the roles that get you closer to that person that you're trying to become. So I really miss working with clients, but I understand that it's not happening because it's a tricky time. Lots of people aren't, I mean, across the country, graduate students in psychology are not getting as many clients as they normally would.
Okay, so are you doing a master's or a PhD?
I'm currently working on the PhD
Okay.
with the University of Utah in the counseling psychology program. You don't have to have a master's to be in it, and that mirrors a lot of other doctoral programs too. Some of them are perfectly happy with people who are straight out of their bachelor's, and that was me. I applied. I took a gap year. My parents were, well, my dad was unemployed at the time because of a certain recession that had hit Vegas during that time period. And so I knew that I needed to work so that we could keep our home and just, maintain our necessities. And so I spent that year working in the home with children and families. And I got accepted into the doctoral program and I got the master's along the way. So I technically have it. I did do research for it as well. And now we're working on that PhD portion of it, which is finishing this dissertation. I've already finished all the classes.
Congratulations. That's awesome. What led you to pursue a graduate degree in counseling psychology?
At the beginning of my pursuit of higher education, I had no idea that graduate school was a possibility or reality. And as I started working with families in the home, so families with children with autism or on the spectrum, and I met a BCBA, the Board Certified Behavior Analyst. And when I asked her about her job and she mentioned, oh yeah, I went to grad school and got this degree, I was completely taken aback. I'm like, what do you mean? There's more education, there's somewhere further that this can go. And as I have worked within this level of education and psychology, what's become the most meaningful is that a PhD allows me to have multiple ways to help people. I can do it through research, I can do it through therapy, I can do it with organizations through consultative work. And that feels awesome to me. I want to gain as many tools as possible to help people, and specifically families.
How has pursuing this degree affected your daily life?
How is it not? It was so hard moving away from my family. That has been the hardest part. I'm a very family rooted person. So I really miss them. They're back in Las Vegas and I'm out here in Salt Lake. Um, Grad school for me has been about growth. Okay, that personal, professional growth. And it can be both beautiful and a little painful. You get a lot of feedback, and that means that I put in a lot of time doing the work. That might be towards my classes, that could be clinical work, or just on the side, what else can I read or do to continue to grow professionally and personally? And balancing that out can be hard. There's a lot of deadlines, there's a lot of ways to contribute. And sometimes for me personally, it's hard to take a break.
It's not that you don't have time for breaks, even though you probably don't. It's that you're so inspired by these things that you don't want to.
Yeah, at first, well, I mean, the first few years, there was nothing I wanted to say no to. I wanted to try it all. And now I've learned that you just can't maintain it. As much
Mhm.
as I want to make a difference in the world in all of these ways, it's just not feasible to do that. I have to model what I talk about. I have to maintain my own mental health in order to be there for my clients or for my research.
So not only do you seem on it, but you seem super passionate and inspired by everything that you're doing. And I'm just wondering how you grow that and how you maintain that passion and inspiration along the way.
I stick with the things that feed me, not just the opportunities that come along. Working with families and with children, that feeds me. So all of my activities are tied back to that, whether it's my research or the kind of therapy that I like to provide or the settings that I like to work in. It all comes back to that, to helping or contributing to making a difference to people who need the support. And so that brings me towards like social justice activities and focusing on communities of color and underserved or marginalized communities. Like those things feed me. And that's why I can keep going because it feels meaningful. And that looks different for every graduate student. I think everyone goes through moments of, ooh, how did I get into this position? Because I feel like I'm not doing great right now. And it could be that I'm terrible at stats. I'm terrible. And I can say that and know that that's just an area where I'm going to need to collaborate more. Or I do like to take on all of these activities. So, okay, how can I learn to not take it all on? Um, so I have moments where I really need to be vulnerable and allow myself to acknowledge that I either can't do it all, I need some help, or this is hard and it's touching on my own personal things. Like we have those like soft spots that we don't want to touch, and grad school touches on them. It does. And part of that process is to recognize what's going on and then try to, get help, get support, or just allow yourself to cry. Like there's nothing, we encourage our clients to cry, and it's fine if I cry too. I think to acknowledge the parts that are painful. And we get feedback all the time, whether it's like, this paper was great, but you got to do this. Hey, that was a good question for your client, but you got to do that. That's all the time. Like imagine doing the best that you can and someone's like, you could have done it a little better. And that's hard.
Yeah, how do you deal with the self-criticisms there?
I'm still figuring that out. I can hear in
Okay.
my own head like, oh, I could have done this, I could have done this, I could have done this. And I just let that be.
Okay.
I am perfectionistic, so I can always think of ways to do it better. But that doesn't mean I have to do it that way every time. Like sometimes because it's imperfect, it's wonderful. So I feel that way today. If you ask me tomorrow, I might be like, oh, that was terrible. I can't believe I did that. I could have been better. But I accept that even though I'm a graduate student, even though I'm like so close to becoming a psychologist, that I too struggle with self-criticism or perfectionism.
After you graduate, what is your dream job?
I've always seen myself in the community. So that would mean being at a clinic that's located somewhere that's accessible via by bus, or, like if I'm in a big city, I want it to be downtown or in an area that it's needed the most. Um, I would see myself at a clinic like that, that's well located, accessible, and working with a broader team. So, not just with other psychologists, but I want to work with social workers and occupational therapists and speech language pathologists. Like, I want to create, because accessibility is such an issue, whether it's cost or location. I want when the families get there that they have all of these services there that they can receive. Because you just imagine these families who are already struggling, having to go to different places for all of these services, and I'd rather them go to one building that houses them. And then we're a team together addressing their concerns with their children or for themselves.
That's really awesome. What does mindfulness look like? And how do you practice it on a daily basis?
Mindfulness to me means authentic presence. There's this intentional practice of just being. I'm not great at that. I can do that. I can do that with my clients. I can be there for someone else. Mindfulness for me is a little trickier. So I'm really good at that when I'm taking those restful moments. So when I'm cooking the recipes of my family, I can be there and I can smell it and taste it and allow myself to just focus on my food. So that's probably my favorite way to practice mindfulness and mindful eating.
Okay. Is it internal or external or both?
I think that depends on every person. But
Okay.
for me, if I'm using it more to interact with my world in an external way, that helps me ground it internally. So that's why cooking works for me, because I'm still engaging in some way and being fully present to that experience. Um, the like peacefulness, inner and external, and like deep breaths, that's hard for me, but that's not the only way to do mindfulness.
Do you have any recommendations for what I should do to try and get into like a PhD program if I wanted to apply next year? Like work wise, something that could make me money but also get me experience?
Work wise, I think like work wise is extremely difficult because the level of like therapy experiences that are available aren't exactly therapy, because you're required to be some sort of supervision or licensure to do that. However, you could get into working with children with autism because you do ABA work. You don't need a license to do ABA work or applied
Okay.
behavior analysis. So you could do, um, right, you could be an ABA tutor, you could volunteer or work at a crisis hotline. And that already gives you the sort of skill sets to speak to people in like their moments of crises. And so that would be amazing experience that not everyone gets. And I don't have experience with that. You could also, um, even if you don't get exact therapy experience right away, even within our own lab, if there's any possibility of you being present for some of the group work, or you're on you're on Atlas.
Hmm.
So if you could be present in the classroom and just ask for the opportunity to lead one of the social emotional learning opportunities, that's still closely tied with it. Graduate school programs recognize that you can't be a therapist before you get to that point. The whole point is that you're trying to learn and get to that place. So instead, they want to see that you are someone who is determined and likable and can engage in conversations, because that's a really critical skill for becoming a therapist. But they also want you to be able to engage in research, because that is one of the key pieces about getting a PhD, is that you're engaging in research as you are gaining the skills to become um, a clinician. So right now during undergrad, be thinking about what kind of research are you engaging in? What outcomes do you have? Like being at a research team meeting is not the same as you presenting your own posters or coming up with an idea and collaborating it on using the existing that we have or suggesting research ideas of your own. Like just get engaging as much as you can. Have posters. If possible, join a research paper, even if you're last author. You know,
Okay.
the work piece is hard. Again, it's a pandemic. They have to be reasonable. There's no way that you could be like, I chose during a pandemic to do home-based work with kids during the pandemic. And they're like, wow, what was that? The first question would be like, what was that like during the pandemic? How did you get COVID? Or it'd be hard. It'd be
Yeah.
hard. But like maintain some friends with grad students who can look over your applications, just because again, all that feedback, we can look at yours and be like, oh, here's a different way of shaping that. Psychology is such a big field. There is room for everyone. One career doesn't look anything like someone else's career. And the path to that, there's no correct path, there's no right path, there's no perfect timing for it all. I encourage anyone who's interested in psychology to just go for it and reach out and ask questions and figure out what sounds good, what feeds you.
Awesome. I really like that. Thank you so much for being on this interview. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot from you.
Thanks, Max. I had a great time.
Me too.